is Revisioning Religion. Conversations on the intersection of spirituality and politics, shedding a new light on the place of religion in society. Greetings, dear listeners. Today I find myself in the company of Bernardo Kastrup. Hello, Bernardo.
Hi there, Jonas. It's a pleasure to be here.
Bernardo, I invited you to have a conversation about idealism and religion because I'm quite interested to hear how you approach traditional religious ideas about matter and spirit. And also, I'd like to see how the concepts you have been advancing for many years might be of importance to get a good understanding of contemporary spiritualities. But before we start discussing all of this, perhaps you can first briefly present yourself to the listeners, just in case some of them don't know who you are.
I am a philosopher. I'm a few things, but in this context, I think it's more appropriate to say I'm a philosopher. I do have a degree in philosophy and a degree in computer science, but I have been putting forward an idealist ontology for a while now, a view of the world that entails that the world is not fundamentally physical. Physicality is just an appearance. What the world is in and of itself is mental. It's made of mentation, just like our inner life itself is made of mentation. And for the past, 15 years or so, I've been articulating this view and backing it up with reasoning and empirical evidence from different sciences, like the neuroscience of consciousness and foundations of physics.
You've indeed been doing that for many years, and I've seen quite a couple of your videos and listened to some podcasts here and there, both in Dutch, because you live in the Netherlands, and in English. So I propose to all the listeners, if they want a very elaborate explanation about your idealism and about, like the title, well, the brilliant title of one of your books says, so why you think materialism is baloney, then I advise a lot of people to go and either read the book or go and listen to those podcasts and see those YouTube videos, because I thought we might take a bit of a different approach and go more to the religious aspect of it, but I'm afraid that we can't skip over everything and simply go straight to the discussion on idealism, religion and spirituality. So I think it's probably necessary to first put a bit of the basic elements in place so that we can build on those during the rest of the conversation. So
Sure.
Let's perhaps first still try to summarize one of your main arguments. And to do so, I'd propose to start from materialism itself. Also because it's in a sense a bit seen as a opposition to religion, let's say, in its concept in the general public's mind as something that supports the scientific worldview or something like that, and secularism, and so would not be spiritual and religious. We might get to the point where we discuss whether it is, in fact, not religious, materialism itself. But let's just start from the premise, which lives broadly in society and which sees materialism as this dominant conviction that supports the modern era where everything in the world is nothing but material causes heaping on top of each other. The building blocks of reality, so to speak, are perhaps not atoms, but at least those concrete things that interact with each other. And even our own minds, our own consciousness is nothing but the result of physiological and biological processes which are going on in the brain. So, I laid out the basic premise of what many people think materialism is or what it supports. And so, why would you indeed say that it's baloney? And perhaps to keep it a bit short and not elaborate on it, because I know you can go on for hours about it. So perhaps let's try to limit ourselves. What do you finally think is the most important or the best argument to say that materialism is baloney?
Oh, there is no one argument that I think is sufficient to justify the notion that materialism is baloney. But one, it mistakes descriptions for the thing described. Matter is defined exhaustively in terms of numbers, quantities. like kilos, centimeters, hertz, all these physical quantities. But these quantities, we came up with them to describe the mental world around us, the world of qualities, of colors, of flavors, textures, melodies, and so on and so forth. And at some point in history, some of us in the intellectual elite figured out that those quantities are the world in itself, and that the qualities are representations created by our brain inside our skull. That's the moment when we tried to pull the territory out of the map, pretend that the map came first, the description came first, and the thing described somehow magically emerged from the description. Now, because we cannot pull the thing described out of the map, we cannot pull the world out of the map, we call it a problem. We call it the hard problem of consciousness, which means that there is nothing about physical parameters in terms of which we could deduce the qualities of experience. And we then promise ourselves that in version 2, 3, or X of the map, we will be able to pull the territory out of the map. Well, pull a chair and wait for that. It's not gonna come anytime soon.
No, but why is it not gonna come anytime soon?
Because it's internally inconsistent. It's a logical reversal. To think that the territory or the description comes before the thing described is absurd. It's also unparsimonious. Materialism defines matter as something that is not mental, that is not experiential, while all we ever have by direct acquaintance is experiences. That's all we ever know. Materialism would say the world out there has no colors, has no flavors, has no melodies. It's purely abstract, entirely abstract. And all the colors and flavors and melodies are made up magically by your brain inside your skull. So the inner surface of your skull is literally beyond the moon as you see at night. Because the moon as you see is a set of qualities, whiteness, shininess, certain forms, and that's supposed to be generated by your brain inside your head. There is also empirical evidence that contradicts materialism outright. Materialism is founded on the notion that physical stuff have standalone existence, that they don't depend on anything else to exist. Everything else depends on physical stuff, like our thoughts depend on physical stuff. And Foundations of Physics has now shown, beyond any shadow of a doubt, after 40 plus years of experimentation, that physical entities do not have standalone existence. They are the outcome of an observation, which then raises the question, what is the nature of the thing that is observed? Because if matter is what arises from observation, what is the thing observed or measured?
But if you say physics has, beyond a doubt, proven that matter isn't there, I think a lot of people would simply say, this is starting to sound strange. When I experience my house, that's my personal experience, but the house itself is bricks, and I can touch those, and I can tear down the building, and I can build a new one, but what I'm holding in my hands, that's the real stuff. And so now it seems like you're saying something in the direction of, on the quantum level, that doesn't really work, but I think that most people would, even if they hear about those quantum theories, think that, well, maybe it's not, the brick is not as solid as I think, but the bottom line is still bundles of energy that lump together, and that eventually, if they're close enough together, start seeing and feeling like matter.
Well, two things. There is no denying that there is an objective world out there independent of our personal minds, an objective from our point of view, in the sense that your thoughts, from my point of view, are objective. I cannot change your thoughts simply by wishing them to be different. They don't depend on my preferences, my tastes. Your thoughts are objective from my point of view. In that same sense, there is no denying that there is an objective world independent of my mind, of my thoughts, of my wishes, of my experiences. But to say that does not mean that that world is not mental. It can still be mental, even if it's not my mentation. In the same sense that you have a mental inner life, that's not my mental inner life, but it is still mental. And the hypothesis is that when we measure that world with our sense organs, with our sensors given to us by evolution, our tongue, our eyes, our nose, when we measure that mental world out there, objective but mental, we form an internal representation of it that we call perception. And perception is also mental. It's a mental representation of something else that is mental. And that one mental quality leads to another is trivial. Your thoughts influence your emotions all the time and the other way around. Perception is the same thing. It's one mental representation arising causally from the observation of another mental process that is not mine, that is out there. Now, another comment is that we cannot deny what is colloquially referred to as matter. Like I have this metal bottle in my hand right now, and we say colloquially that metal bottle is made of matter. In this colloquial sense, the word matter refers to something that is not in my mentation. And that's, of course, true. There is a colloquially material world out there. What I deny is the strict philosophical definition of what this materiality means. And strictly, materialism says that matter is not mental. While in my view, what we call matter is a representation of something that is itself mental, although not my mentation, maybe not your mentation. So there is an objective world out there that we can colloquially refer to as material, but to say that it's purely abstract, that it has nothing to do with mentation, it's something else that we can't even visualize, because visualization intrinsically entails qualities, and matter is not supposed to be qualitative at all. It's supposed to be merely quantitative. That's a step that, one, explains nothing, and two, creates insoluble problems. In other words, it's nonsense, it's baloney.
Yeah. But that makes a philosophical argument. And what would be to come back to when you say physics has shown that matter isn't the thing that we think it is? Can you give an example? Because all that quantum mechanics for the lay people, let's say, isn't very easy to understand and often gets abused in certain senses as well, certainly in spiritual circles.
I'll try to boil it down to very understandable terms. I'll sacrifice a little bit of rigor in doing that, but only a little bit. So there is one experiment that has been performed in a multitude of manners for the last 40 years plus, and it goes as follows. You create two material particles together. When two particles are created together, they are what we call entangled, which means that you cannot describe the behavior of one independently of the behavior of the other. They are locked in a dance, like a couple dancing the tango. And then you shoot one of these particles in almost the speed of light in one direction and the other one in the opposite direction. And after a while, you have two scientists, say Alice and Bob, and Alice makes a measurement on particle A and Bob makes a measurement on particle B. Now it turns out that what Alice chooses to measure about particle A determines what Bob sees when he observes particle B. In other words, the physical properties of the particles cannot be said to exist before the measurement, because otherwise what Alice chooses to measure simply discloses or reveals the properties particle A already had, independently of whatever properties particle B has. But that's not how it works. It turns out that physical properties emerge out of measurement. And what that means is that physical properties, or physicality, or materiality, is not a fundamental feature of the world. In other words, it doesn't have standalone existence. It only arises from measurement. And idealism makes absolute sense of this, almost trivial sense of this, but you run into a wall if you think that physicality has standalone existence.
Yeah, you definitely run into a wall, but what do people like me who are not physicists, what do we really have to imagine? So that particle, that's an atom, let's say, and then where we decide to measure its, its speed or the way it goes up and down. And the fact that I want to measure either the speed or the way it goes up and down influences the speed of the other particle, let's say 100 kilometers away.
Yes, technically it's angular momentum,
Okay.
what is measured, but it doesn't matter. What you said is accurate enough.
Basically the same thing,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, that's interesting. So that's a good argument or a good example of why materialism runs into a wall, as you say. But to go from there, materialism doesn't work. How do you jump to, well, it's a mental process? To come back to the idea that a lot of people will think, well, we're just talking about fields and energy waves and so on. Oftentimes in spiritual circles, people refer to quantum mechanics because they think it proves something for them. But my sense is that most people, if they hear about such experiments from quantum mechanics, they capture it within their almost kind of Star Wars-like view of the world, that there's this force all through the universe, and this force influences everything that happens and connects everything with everything. It's not to downplay it, it's just to make it more visual, mentioning Star Wars, but I do believe there's much sense in it, and it's proper for people to believe so. Are we talking about this? Because when you say it's mental, it feels like you actually envision something else. It's not this kind of force-like energy that you mean, but something else.
Okay. First of all, I am allergic to when people start saying, well, it's just energy. I mean, what the hell do you mean by just energy? Even physicists don't have an unambiguous definition of energy that applies to every context. Even within physics, it's not a clean concept. So when people say, oh, it's just energy, what the hell do you mean? I'm not for this mushy, vague hand-waving. I don't think it helps. So I try to go about it in a very precise, maybe wrong, but at least it's precisely wrong and very explicit way. So we need to take two steps. The first step is, how does the experiment defeat the notion that physical entities have standalone existence? In other words, the world as it is in itself is not physical. That's the first step. The next step is, okay, if it's not physical, then what is it then? So let's focus on the first step now. Why does this experiment refute the standalone existence of physical entities? Well, because whatever physical parameters you choose to measure, and by the way, today, all physical parameters are vibrations or excitations or waves, because everything is reduced to patterns of excitation of quantum fields. And so this is not New Age saying this. This is quantum field theory, the most successful scientific theory ever devised by mankind, proven to many decimal points to be accurate. So you don't escape the problem by saying, well, if you're not measuring angular momentum, at least then the fields exist. Well, everything is a field, according to quantum field theory. There are 17 primary fields in nature, and you explain everything in terms of those fields. So all physical properties are vibrations of a field. That's science today. So you refute the notion that whatever physical properties define matter, that they were there before measurement. Now, how do you understand this intuitively if you just give up on this assumption that the world is eminently physical? I'll give you a metaphor so you understand this. Suppose you are flying in an airplane and there is a storm outside, you cannot see anything. So it's like you don't have a windscreen. You don't have a window, a transparent window to see the sky outside. You have to fly by instruments alone. All you have are the dials on your dashboard. Now, those dials present to you the result of measurements that the airplane's sensors make of the world outside. So you have airspeed sensor, radar, humidity sensor, all kinds of sensors that are measuring the world outside. And the results of these measurements are presented to the pilot on little dials on the dashboard of instruments. And the pilot can fly the airplane safely without ever seeing the sky, just flying by instruments and land safely in an airport somewhere. So the dashboard is very useful. Now, what we do in our culture today, including many physicists, is we think the physical world is the sky outside. And what we have to understand is that the physical world is the dashboard, because we are the airplane. Our tongue, our nose, our eyes, our eardrums, those are sensors. They make measurements of whatever it is outside. And the results of those measurements are presented to us on the screen of perception. Ergo, the screen of perception is the dashboard. It's not the world as it is in itself. We don't have a transparent window to see the world as it is in itself. That would be incompatible with life. Technically, it would make our internal entropy have no upper limit, and it would not be favored by evolution. You can prove that evolution would drive swiftly to extinction any species that would see the world as it actually is. It's a whole argument, but this has been sufficiently proven. So, if we insist that the dashboard is the world, what happens is the following. If the airplane sensors are not making a measurement, the dashboard shows nothing. And we get all confused because we think the dashboard is the world. So if the dashboard shows nothing, how can it be? All there is the dashboard. It has to show something. So what we have to understand is that the physical world is a result of measurement. In other words, it's what is displayed on the dashboard. But before measurement, there is a world outside. It's just not physical. The world doesn't disappear because you didn't measure it. The only thing that disappears are what is displayed on the dashboard. And that's what these experiments are telling us. The physical properties arise from measurement because they are the dashboard. They are the result of a measurement. The thing measured is not a particle. In the same sense that the airspeed outside is not a needle on a dial on your dashboard. Mm-hmm. The particle is the representation on the dashboard upon measurement. And that's why physicality only can be spoken of after measurement. Mm-hmm. But before measurement, there is a world. It's just not physical. And now the next question is, okay, if it's not physical, what is it then? Yeah. Well, what is the only other thing we know for sure to exist? It's mental stuff. How many centimeters do your thoughts have? What is the kilogram weight of your emotions? Mental stuff is not describable in terms of physical parameters. In other words, it's other kind of stuff. And that other kind of stuff we know to exist. Not only that, we know it to look like matter when it's observed from the outside. My thoughts present themselves to a neuroscientist in the form of material patterns of brain activity. So the statement is, the world beyond us is exactly the same thing. It's transpersonal mental processes, not your mental processes, not mine. Transpersonal, natural mental processes out there. And when we measure it with our sense organs, the result is represented to us in our internal dashboard as objects and events extended in space and time. Mm-hmm. That's the sort of obvious, natural, logical answer to the riddle.
It's a logical answer, but that would kind of imply that the real reality, so to speak, underlying everything, which we can't see in its essence, which we can only perceive through a material manifestation, that reality is mental exactly like we experience mentality ourselves. So that means it's emotional, it's psychological, and so on.
Well, I'm not trying to anthropomorphize the world. Mm-hmm. It's mental in essence. In other words, it's stuff of the same kind mm-hmm. as our emotions and our thoughts, which doesn't mean that it has the same kind, it doesn't have the same thoughts and emotions that we have. It's of the same kind as our thoughts and emotions, but not our thoughts and emotions. I don't think nature sits around pondering about the meaning of life, mm-hmm. but it is mental stuff, alien mental stuff. Try to imagine the mental inner life of a mosquito. Mm-hmm. It's ineffable. You can't get there. It's not only ineffable, it's unimaginable. It's too alien, mm-hmm. but it's still mental, and it's very familiar and subjective from the mosquito's own point of view. Now try to do something like that for the universe at large. It is mental, but it's a whole other order of magnitude of mentation. It's fundamentally beyond our ability to imagine, but its essence, its kind, its type of existence is the same type as our thoughts and emotions.
And so what would then be, if it's the same kind, the logical next question would be then you'd kind of suppose that there's a connection between the universal mind and your own mind. Also asking the question a bit because probably a lot of the standard biologist or something would reply to, but you're placing it the other way around. It's you get hit by somebody that creates a bunch of hormones raging through your body, and that goes to your brain, and then your brain produces the anger. What you're saying is that the anger somehow manifests within the body as tension and so on and so on. So how do you see the function of the brain? Is it more like it's an antenna which kind of resonates or feels the emotion or the mental quality of reality, or how exactly would you see the link between human minds and the mindset of the cosmos, as you're kind of explaining it?
So there are two questions folded in what you said. One is what's the relationship between personal minds and the universal mind, so to say, and the other one is the arrow of causation. If I stick your arm with a needle, that's a physical process and it causes pain. So you're reverting it, and if you revert it, it's not empirically tenable. So let's address the first question first. I think human beings, any living being, biology in general, metabolism in general, is what the dissociative process in a field of subjectivity that underlies all nature looks like. Your brain activity is not what generates your mental inner life, it's what your mental inner life looks like. And your mental inner life is separate from the rest of the universe because it's a dissociated mental complex thereof. And we know dissociation empirically. We know that in extreme forms, it's called dissociative identity disorder in the DSM-5, the Psychiatric Diagnostics Manual. We know that what is essentially one mind can seemingly fragment itself into multiple centers of awareness that have their own compartmentalized inner life inaccessible to one another. And that's usually a response to trauma in human beings. When you have to compartmentalize your memories in order to bear the trauma without contemplating the full brunt, the full force of it when it's integrated. So we know this happens in nature. We know that when it happens in a human mind, there is something it looks like. Research done by Jolanda Schlumpf in the Netherlands 8 years ago shows that you can put people with dissociative identity disorder under a brain scan and you can diagnose them. Those dissociative processes have an image. They look like something discernible that you can differentiate from controls. So my statement is that the mind of nature undergoes something akin to dissociation. And what those dissociative processes look like is what we call life. That's what life is. Life is a dissociative process that emerges and eventually extinguishes itself in nature. And that's why I can't read your thoughts, and that's why I don't know what's happening in China or in the galaxy of Andromeda right now. I am dissociated from those mental processes in this subjective foundation of all nature. So that's the first answer. So in that sense, I don't think the brain is a receiver. That would imply a form of dualism, and dualism is not ultimately tenable. It's a useful metaphor, but it's not ultimately tenable because you can't explain how things that are ontologically distinct can interact with one another. But anyway, so we are not filters or radio receivers. We are just dissociative processes in this subjective field of mentation that underlies all nature. Now, the other question, the arrow of causation, I hear this attempted refutation a lot, and it is as understandable and intuitive as it is silly, because it assumes dualism. It assumes that there is a essentially physical needle that if you stick it in my arm, it will be a physical process, which then leads to a mental process, namely the pain I will feel. What idealism says is that there is no such essentially physical things. There are only mental things, and physicality is what mental processes look like from across a dissociative boundary. So that needle is a representation on your dashboard of a transpersonal mental process. Sticking that needle in your arm is a representation on your dashboard of a transpersonal mental process interacting with your dissociative mental sphere. So the causative process is mental. It just appears as physicality on the screen of perception. And that one mental process can have a causative effect on another. It's trivial. Just think bad thoughts and you have bad emotions. There you go. Thoughts directly causing certain types of emotions. The needle that sticks your arm, the pill you swallow, the glass of alcohol, the baseball bat hitting you in the head. These are all images of mental processes, transpersonal mental processes impinging on your personal, dissociated mental processes. And that can go as far as to kill you. In other words, to disrupt the dissociation so much that it ends.
Okay, I think we've laid down the basic elements of your ideas. And that leads me to a bit of a follow-up, which I've been wanting to ask you for a long time. If you talk about the cosmic mind, that's not the way you said it, but the mentality that underlies the whole of the universe, and all of us being refractions or dissociations of that one mind, that obviously sounds a lot like many traditional views and contemporary views of the divine, of God himself. So that will be my next question. Do you think that what you're describing is the existence of God?
Personally, I do think so. Mm-hmm. I normally don't use the word God to describe it because there are probably 7.5 billion different definitions of what that word means. But to myself, yes, that's how I see the divinity. It's those aspects of nature's mentation that are not within my own dissociative boundaries. And they may be so strange to me as to not be recognizable. And they are infinitely more powerful than I am.
Mm-hmm. So in a sense, then, you're a contemporary version of the people who try to come up with proofs of the existence of God.
Well, I don't think this is a question of proof. I think medieval scholasticism sort of really mistook the mark in trying to prove the existence of God through little, rational derivations. I think that's silly. I would say
still
that
the proof of Anselmo is brilliant, I think myself. But okay.
Well, they operate within the constraints of the human intellect,
That's
and the human intellect is about 30,000 years old. I mean, it was born a blink of an eye ago. To imagine that it has already evolved enough to be as powerful as to capture everything that's salient about reality and divinity is just preposterous.
Yeah, that's true.
I think the proof of the existence of God is look around. Look up to the sky. It's everywhere. When the galaxies, the star systems, the black holes, the quasars, this is what God's mentation look like when we gaze upon it. That's the proof. It's so close to us as to be unavoidable. But we don't see it because we have an inner narrative that tells us these things have nothing to do with mentation. They're just there, they're mechanical. Well, that's what is silly. Yeah. That's what is arbitrary and not logically based and not empirically based either.
What I have always found fascinating about your ideas is that you have this very rational, academic, argumentative approach to end up with ideas and concepts that resonate very strongly with things like Advaita Vedanta and other non-dualist strands of religion, whether it's Hindu or even in Christianity, where you have loads of mystics like Meister Eckhart, to name but one, who also have this tendency to see the unified whole behind everything. And in Islam, for example, there's this idea that everything in existence is but refractions of the attributes or the 99 names, as they are called, of God himself. So the same thing, the essence of reality is mental, is divine, and that divinity first portrays itself within those 99 names, which then create all the physical forms. So, but in those same traditions, whether Islam, Hinduism, or Christianity, or all the others, you have different tendencies, of course. Yes, the non-dualist ideas exist, and they seem to resonate a lot with your ideas, but you also have the more dualist, as you mentioned. There's a bunch of dualist ideas as well, where matter becomes something in itself. Would you then say that the dualist ideas of religion should be put in the waste bin, that the only ones that really survive scrutiny today are the non-dualist forms of religion?
I think dualism is a very useful metaphor. And for some people, maybe for the majority of people, the intellectual baggage they carry with them, which they inherited from culture, is such that there is no other way to get a more or less valid understanding of nature but for dualism. Dualism is less wrong than physicalism. it's less wrong than the attempt to reduce all qualities to pure quantities, because that's just outright stupid. So I would not disregard dualism, because there is a sense in which nature behaves as though dualism were true. The moment dissociation happens in the mind of nature, in that field of subjectivity, you immediately have the dualism of what is inside the dissociative boundary and what is outside the dissociative boundary. Dissociation determines a boundary that creates a kind of dualism, me and the other, here and there, subject and object. The mistake we make is to bring this down all the way to the base level, is to say that not only is there a difference in apprehension of my mental inner life and the world outside, but that difference is reflected in different types of existence, one purely quantitative and then the other one purely qualitative. But most people do not go to this kind of questions. They do not even know that there is this difference between quantitative and qualitative and then the strict and rigorous philosophical issues. So I think it's a valid metaphor useful in the culture to understand that nature behaves as though certain forms of dualism were true. And there is a sense in which they are true. It's just not an ontological sense. So I wouldn't throw it away now. But I would say that for those who have the inclination to look deeper and whose intellect does not give them a free pass and forces them to seek consistency all the way down, then you will find that in some form of idealism or non-dualism, because that's when all the intellectual and empirical questions get resolved cleanly. Everything falls in its place. There are no internal contradictions. There are no contradictions with empirical observation. And then you get a certain kind of intellectual satisfaction. But I would consider this less valuable than the direct, life-changing, transformative spiritual insight that one can have praying to the divinity under the assumption of dualism. Ultimately, that's more transformative than an intellectual understanding. Although even that spiritual insight, if it's taken to its ultimate depth, you realize what Meister Eckhart realized, which is the eyes with which God looks at me are the same eyes with which I look at God. In other words, there is only one thing going on. That's why Jesus, the Christ, is God. That's why the Trinity, the Holy Spirit, which is a field diffused throughout our nature, that is God. God the Father, the Godhead, that's God too, entirely God. And Jesus, a human being, he is God too, not partly, fully. And all three are fully God. I mean, we were talking about Eastern non-duality, and you talked about Islam. I think you're right in all of these accounts, but Christianity has non-duality spread all over it. Read the Gospel of John. Jesus is the Word. The Word is a translation from the Greek logos, which means word, but also means thought, mental activity. God is the logos. God is mental activity. And creation is an expression of the word. It's there. If you have the eyes to see, it's there.
Also in early Christianity, the logos was also used because he was seen as the wisdom, as the incarnation of wisdom itself within God. Like you have the Bible books in the Torah and the books of wisdom, and it's that wisdom which had taken physical shape in Christ himself. That was one of the dominant ideas in the first century. And it goes together with what you're saying, because you could use wisdom as a word, but you could also say, basically, consciousness. The knowing of everything in one moment of everything that exists. So the full consciousness of the universe, which then takes shape in a particular individual. Yeah. So I do see how your idealism can support all those concepts like Trinity and so on. But I've always felt a bit that the things that you say resonate really well with more Indian philosophy and specifically with Advaita Vedanta, where you have the whole idea of Maya being the illusion, everything that exists. Yes, it exists, but it is but illusion. And behind it is Brahman, and Brahman is the real essence of everything. And we ourselves, the Atman itself, which is our inner core, is also this Brahman. And the real realization that the wise people have to do is exactly finding out that there is no difference between Atman and Brahman. So that's a core concept. Is that also something that resonates with you, or is that something that you just later heard of and thought, oh, that's nice, sounds a lot like my stuff, but then never dealt with? Or does it influence your ideas as well? Because I know you come from this computer ICT background as well, and then the philosophy and so on, and you have this rigorous argumentation to your writings. But I'm wondering whether the religious inspiration that's all around for this non-dualistic thinking also influenced the way you started thinking about it.
Well, it provides reassurance. I didn't come at this from the perspective of first-person experience or introspective insight. My first job in life was at CERN, the particle accelerator in Switzerland. So I am indoctrinated into a way of being in the world that is driven by the intellect and by observation and less by introspection, although my introspection has evolved by leaps and bounds as I became more mature and an adult. But I never defend my point of view based on introspective insight or spiritual insight or revelation. But I don't disregard those either, and I see them as complementary. And I take it to heart that a lot of what I say reflects the wisdom of the Upanishads. And we focus a lot on Eastern or Indian, in particular, spirituality. Correct me if I am wrong, but I think what happened there was that the original insights are in the Vedas, and in the Vedas they have a mythological form, a symbolic form. And then much later, let's say less than 2,000 years ago, some scholars interpreted those and tried to provide a more or less literal explanation of what that meant, and then you got the Upanishads. So you have a sort of a less mythologized approach to Eastern philosophy because you have the Upanishads, because that effort was done some time ago. And for Christianity, there has been less effort in that direction, in the notion of translating the mythological symbolism into something more or less literal. And that's why we say, well, all this stuff resonates more with the Indian mysticism, which is true, but this is a bone I don't want to let go of. I don't see Christianity as fundamentally inferior.
Oh, absolutely.
I think everybody is ultimately saying the same thing. We make a mess of it because we are children. Children make a mess of things that they initially understand. And that's what we are. We make a mess of it. We go to war with one another because we think that the original revelation was different. And I don't think any of those revelations were different. But we are human beings rooted in nature. It should come as no surprise that across history and across geographies, we are all bumping against the same truth because we are in it. We are immersed in it. Whatever it is that the truth is, we are in it. We are part of it. We arise from it as part of it. So it shouldn't be surprising that we see echoes behind all of the world's traditions. It's what we make of those afterwards when we bring in our 30,000-year-old intellect, a little child, a newborn, that we make a mess of the whole thing because we are children. But at the source, at the roots of our being, those intuitions reflect something that is true.
Yeah, I think so too. Just on the point that you said about the Vedas, how they start and so on, if I remember correctly, it's not my expertise, but I remember when I was studying theology and was sitting in the class on Hinduism, that the teacher told us that the oldest segment in the Vedas, as far as they can trace, that the oldest segment actually is about the One. And it's not about different gods and so on. So the whole experience starts from the primal experience of connectedness of everything into oneness. And that, it makes me think also of my previous podcast was with Mark Vernon about the secret history of Christianity and the evolution of consciousness and so on. I think you know him as well personally. And so in that podcast, he also talks of the birth of Christianity as an experience of the one divineness which is felt within the individual as well, and this connection that we have been talking about. So I think there's much to say for that pivotal moments in the religion, in the history of religion, certainly not always, but oftentimes were about somehow realizing this oneness all of the sudden, and then the fire that comes from it.
Even in the New Testament, we don't need to go to the Old Testament where it's pretty clear. But even in the New Testament, after the sacrifice of the Christ, the Holy Spirit descended into every righteous man, woman, and child. I mean, that's symbolic language for God is inside you.
Absolutely.
It's you.
It's difficult to interpret it otherwise. But then one thing that does come to mind when you were talking about it, in those religious traditions, we talked about dualism. I like your idea about, yeah, sure, because reality itself presents itself in a dualistic way, but if you think it through, it cannot hold, and then you have to go to the oneness. But on the other hand, that brings us to the question, okay, but why then the physical forms, or the perceived physical forms? You'd say they're mental, but why does the illusion get created? Now, the religious traditions have their various explanations. Some would say, in a dualist sense, well, it really was created as something opposed to it, and the whole world is a test, and if you do the test well, then you get to go to heaven. That idea exists. But on the other end of the spectrum, there's this sense of the divine simply wanted to present itself in beauty, and so the creation is a form of beauty because it wants beauty in existence. And another explanation might be God wanted to know himself. He might be consciousness, but the consciousness wanted to know its own consciousness, something like that. So the expression to relate to itself, and then we get this kind of Trinitarian idea, in fact. So there's different explanations in traditional religious contexts, but so I'm wondering, what's your explanation? Why exactly? Is there any meaning to the illusion of matter?
Again, there are two questions folded in. One is, why does God appear to us as matter? That's one question. And the other question is, why did dissociation happen? Why did life arise? In other words, the same thing as dissociation. I'll answer the first question first. So why does the world appear to us as matter? Because that's what, evolutionarily speaking, helped our survival the most. What we call matter is just a dashboard of instruments. And to survive, we had to evolve the best instruments possible that would give us a sort of at-a-glance perspective of the environment around us, so we could react to environmental challenges timely. And that dashboard looks like physicality. You know, you look around and you see so many features and details. It's a dashboard. And counter to that is thinking directly all the thoughts and emotions around you, and pretend that you're a perfect telepath in the middle of an agitated crowd. That wouldn't be functional. You wouldn't survive. So instead of that, you see people around you presented on the dashboard in the form of matter that's much more functional, helps survival a lot more. So it's not an illusion in the same sense that it's not an illusion that the sun orbits the earth. That we see the sun going from west to east is exactly what you would expect if the earth orbits the sun. So when we say that, oh, but it looks like it's the other way around, well, that's a false account. It's not an illusion. It's just a false account. We have a false account of what's going on. Matter is the same thing. It's not an illusion. It's the perfect dashboard. But we have a false account about it. We think that the dashboard is the world outside. It's not. It's just a representation thereof. Yeah. Now, the other question, why did dissociation happen at all? In human beings, it happens because of trauma, but I don't think we should anthropomorphize that and say that God suffered some kind of trauma.
Well, speaking from Christianity, you could say something like the ultimate sacrifice of God into existence. You could call it a trauma.
Some form of panentheism, I'm not completely close to that, but I don't want to put that idea forward as the answer. I don't want to commit to that. But it could be that the trauma of the realization of loneliness, what I like to call the vertigo of eternity. It's very difficult to contemplate the true reality of our situation. We tend to recoil from that. At least I did when it came to me. But I think there are two other answers that are possible. One of the answers is the least committal one, which is just to say dissociation happens because it can happen. And given enough time, it's bound to happen. Why do volcanoes erupt? Why do stars explode into supernovae or collapse into black holes? Because this is stuff that happens in nature. Stuff happens in nature. Given enough time, everything that can happen is bound to happen. And life is just one of these things. In other words, dissociation. Life and dissociation is the same thing. Life is what dissociation looks like, in my terminology. So it was bound that at some point, dissociation would happen in this spatially unbound field of subjectivity at the foundation of nature. So it could be as simple as that. Another answer could be what you suggested, which is we notice that there is something that distinguishes us, human beings, from most of the rest of nature. Perhaps all of it, but at least most of it, which is our ability to self-reflect, to be self-aware, to recognize ourselves as the subject of our experiences as opposed to the experiences themselves. We don't say, I am hunger. We say, I feel hunger. We don't say, I am pain. We say, I have pain. And that's because of self-reflection. We recognize ourselves as the subject of the experiences and not the experiences themselves. And this is in us after 4 billion years of evolution on this planet at great cost to the whole of the ecosystem. I don't think the paramecium has self-reflection. I don't think my cats have self-reflection. Maybe pachyderms and cetaceans have, elephants and whales. But clearly self-reflection is something at the bleeding edge of the evolutionary arrow. And what it allows, that's an empirical given, what it allows to happen in nature is for nature to become self-aware through our eyes. We are the first aspect of nature that looks around and says, whoa, this is nature, and I am aware of it, and I am aware of myself as part of it. Maybe this was the telos all along. Maybe this was the instinctive, felt destination, the felt goal, and the entire evolutionary drama was a sort of a more or less blind attempt to get to this intuited goal of self-awareness. So nature can get a grip on itself, can get a hold of itself and say, oh, this is what I am. This is what I am doing. Do I like it or do I not like it? And it dovetails very well with religion. Again, let's take Christianity. I could go to Islam, which I have profound admiration for, including the name Islam, surrender. I just love that. And the ritual of, bowing to something bigger than your ego 5 times a day. I'm lyrical about that. But let's stick to Christianity for now. If you look at the Old Testament, the book of Job, when Job finally has an audience with God to present his case for being a righteous man, despite everything that God put him through, killing his children, taking his farms and animals and giving him illness and so forth. When Job presents his case, what God does is to go on a tirade, on a long monologue saying, who are you to question me? I am the force behind the storms, and so on and so forth. What he's saying there is, I am nature. I am spontaneous. I'm not self-reflective. I cannot pass value judgments. I am omniscient, but I cannot explicitly consult my omniscience in a deliberate way. The devil is much better at that. The devil in the Old Testament is not the bad guy. He's just a prosecutor in the court of God. So it's right there. Nature, originally the God of the Old Testament, Yahweh, before the summum bonum of Christ in the New Testament, is instinctive, is spontaneous. He acts spontaneously. And only through the incarnation, look at the symbolism, through the incarnation, through God becoming man, then the summum bonum comes into existence, because Jesus is God, not a part of God, not only the Son of God, but is God. Now God can pass value judgment because God has been through the human experience, even was crucified. It's out there if you have the eyes to see. It's infinite wisdom.
Interesting. Also interesting that you bring up the book of Job, because that's a nice segue to another aspect I wanted to discuss with you. You've written a book about Carl Jung and how idealism is behind his thinking. Now, I want to get to that one because I personally think that the importance of Carl Jung is not recognized. I mean, there's loads of books about him. Many people read his stuff still and so on. So he's an important figure. But I mean, in universities, everybody will hear about Freud and about psychoanalytics. And Jung was probably, I think, on a cultural level, way more influential than Freud ever was. Freud was important, obviously, no one would deny, but the importance of Jung in every type of contemporary spirituality is immense. From New Agey stuff to the more, let's say, personal self-development, even that concept, self-development, is actually something that comes straight from his individuation and so on and so on. So that being said, Jung as an important figure within contemporary spirituality, and also how loads of modern people approach their own religion. So the way we, lots of Christians in Belgium, where I live, or in the Netherlands, where you live, the way they approach Christianity often has elements that come from this Jungian type of dealing with the world, thinking about concepts such as the subconscious and your shadow, and how your ego is something that you have to wrestle with to become a more whole person, and so on and so on. So, was that the reason why you started analyzing Jung's ideas, or was that something completely different? That's one question, and then as a follow-up, logically, what's the importance of placing idealism within the context of Jung's ideas?
Well, regarding the first question, my motivation for sort of trying to elucidate what Jung meant with his writing was just to set the record straight. I feel it will sound funny what I'm about to say, but it's sincere. Whether it's nonsensical or not, it is sincere. I feel a certain weight of responsibility towards certain ancestors. And
that's nice.
I've managed to address this for two of them, Jung and Schopenhauer. There are more. I feel an increasing sense of responsibility towards Nicolaas von Cues, Nicolas de Cusanus, well, whoever you want to call him. Swedenborg is another one.
Okay.
So I felt the responsibility for setting the record straight about their work, because I felt people have completely misrepresented their words, left and right. Another one I feel some responsibility towards is Nietzsche, but that one is beyond help.
Okay.
Because he changed his mind so many times that he's beyond help. I can't do anything. Sorry, Mr. Nietzsche, but I can't help you. But Jung, I felt I could help, and Schopenhauer, I felt I could help. And Jung was very close to me since a time before I started philosophizing. I was in my teens when I chanced upon Jung during a holiday in the mountains. Okay. It was the preface of a funny book called The I Ching, which I would have immediately dismissed as just some silly oracle. But Jung's introduction to that book sort of opened my mind to a different way of regarding symbolism. That there may be something behind symbolism if you don't take it literally. And I mean, basic understanding, but for me it was a revelation when I was in my early teens. So I have this closeness to Jung's work since many, many years, well over 35 years or more.
That's probably also the first thing I read about Jung, I guess, also in my teens. The same I Ching with the same preface to the Carl Wilhelm, I think is his name, who did the I Ching translation.
Yeah. Richard Wilhelm.
Richard, right. Okay, and so?
So I sometimes it's even hard for me to distinguish my own views from Jung's, because Jung's views are so sort of interpenetrated, intertwined with my own since the early formation of my thought. But to me, it is clear that Jung is misrepresented a lot, even for well-intentioned people. There was that series in the early 80s, 1984, hosted by Don Cupid, in which he basically says, Jung didn't deny God. He just said that God is merely psychological. Almost saying, well, God is nothing. It's just an idea in our minds. And it was clear to me that's not at all what Jung meant. What Jung meant was that God is merely psychological in the same sense that everything else is merely psychological. In other words, mental. And Jung is even clear. He says, if it's a matter of space, then it doesn't matter whether God is outside or inside, because the space on the inside is infinite. So he goes as far as to say that mind has no boundaries if you just manage to see beyond the ego. If you fall into that unbound territory, he called it the collective unconscious, and unconscious between air quotes, because what he meant by that was not to deny phenomenal consciousness. What he meant was to deny meta-consciousness or conscious metacognition. It's a terminology thing that a lot of people fall for. So Jung was very clearly an idealist. The whole notion of synchronicity is founded on an idealist perspective, because what he's saying is that meaningful coincidences happen because the way our mind unfolds is governed by our own psychological archetypes or templates of behavior, and the way the world unfolds is governed by the same psychological archetypes. So they are bound to unfold in a way that is aligned as far as meaning is concerned. Both are unfoldings of mind, driven by the same universal archetypes at the foundation of nature. In other words, he's basically saying right there, idealism is the correct way to look at things. But to this day, he gets portrayed by some experts, supposed experts, even as a materialist. Like Anthony Stevens, in his little book about Jung, he says, well, the archetypes just mean a genetic inheritance. What? That contradicts everything Jung ever said. That's nonsensical. Maybe that's what Anthony Stevens thinks, but not Jung. Don't attribute this to Jung, please.
Interesting. I didn't mention, but the reason why I thought your mentioning of the Book of Job was a nice segue is because Jung also wrote a small book about the Book of Job where he interpreted the whole book. Did you read that one as well? And was that one of your... Yeah, that's what I would guess. So is there something that you took from that book as well, particularly?
Absolutely, the whole book.
Okay.
I think it is a candidate for the most phenomenal work of the 20th century. It's a treasure. I think it's the apex of Jung's legacy. If people listening to this podcast take anything out of it, it should be go and read Answer to Job. It's a tiny book. You can read it in one afternoon lying on your bathtub. And it will change your life.
Okay.
It will literally change your life, as it changed Jung's life. Because Jung considered that book that book freed him. It validated his father's life, even.
Okay.
It was his salvation, in a sense, the insights of that book. And writing that book was a major revolution in Jung's life.
And why is that? What's the essence of the book that makes it so special?
Because it captured the meaning of life. It's such a small thing. Okay. It captured the meaning of life, the reason why we exist. It's there.
And he does so from an idealist perspective, also in that book, according to you.
You need to read the rest of his corpus to be absolutely sure about that. In Answer to Job, he tries to remain as metaphysically agnostic as possible. But if you have read the rest, then you know where he's speaking from which worldview he's speaking from, where he's standing. And the meaning of life, I mean, if I just say it now, it loses all the power without the context, the powerful context of the book. But the meaning of life is to help God become self-reflective, capable of passing value judgments about his own actions, or its own actions, or her own actions. And the understanding that life is sacrificial, that your life's not about you and my life's not about me. This is one of the most absurd and dysfunctional ideas to get rooted in the Western mind, and underlies all the entire industry of self-help, which is your life is about you. It's about your happiness. You should be happy. That's what your life is all about. What? Why? We are tiny parts of nature. What's going on is what nature is doing. We are insignificant. And at the same time, and that's the message from Answer to Job, at the same time, God depends on us, these little insignificant parts. So long as we understand that our life is not about us, Our life is service, is sacrifice. Sacrifice means to render sacred. So our life is sacrificial in that sense. It's not about us, it's about God. And if you understand this, you are a long way down the path to the solution of depression, ennui, anxiety, nihilism, and the unbearable lightness of being, as Kundera put it.
So then that also ties in with your feeling to have to kind of not restore Jung, but what was the expression you used to do something for your forefathers to
render a service
and to correct the image about them? Because that's interesting. You mentioned all the self-help groups, or not groups, the self-help industry, let's call it that way. Like I said, in a sense, it partly is derived from Jung and from the idea of individuation. But so you would say that's the complete opposite of what Jung actually meant with individuation.
Yes. And it's so clear in Jung, because individuation is about integrating the whole of our minds, and the whole of our minds include the collective unconscious. In other words, he's talking about the integration of the transpersonal, not the personal. The personal is just the ego and the little personal unconscious. You're a little repository of traumas and things that you repress. But individuation is beyond that. Individuation is about integrating the archetypes of nature into your own mental expression. It's the transpersonal flowing through you. And that's the critical point that is missed. Look, the reason this is so important is that the personal sphere is a very, very claustrophobic, insignificant sphere. And if you think that your life is about that, it's about somehow finding a way to make yourself happy, you are locked up in solitary confinement. And nothing you do can ultimately have meaning, because you as just an individual have no meaning. You will come to an end soon enough, and nobody will ever remember you. A million years from now, nobody will know what we were talking about here today. So that's the prison. You may be happy in solitary confinement, but that happiness is ephemeral. It's going to vanish in no time. And the key is the understanding that freedom resides in service. In other words, and that's the seeming paradox, it's when you are bound to service. When you were a slave in a positive way, only then are you truly free. And that's the message of Jung. You are only free in service to the transpersonal.
Which brings us back to why you like the name Islam so much, the submission to giving yourself to the bigger divine.
Yes, the Prophet definitely brought to us an awareness of certain things that were badly needed.
Interesting. So what then, if the self-help industry is so wrong about what the great prophets of the self-help industry actually meant, how do you look at the whole industry also around positive thinking, which is closely tied to the self-help? I'm asking this because the whole positive thinking, which has its own history, which we can't delve into now, but it has a history of about 150 years, let's say. But it advances an idea that, in a certain sense, is idealist, acting as if the world is, or life is in essence, something mental. But it also advances this idea that there's this mind over matter, that your mind can control what happens to you in life. The worst example probably is The Secret of Rhonda Byrne, where if you think hard enough about being rich, that money will flow to you, that kind of stuff. But of course, there's also more sensible approaches to positive thinking as well. But how do you look at it? Because for me, underlying there's this unrecognized dualism. Because if you have mind over matter, then matter, whether it's richness or something else, or even your health, then you're still kind of within the dualism, all the while pretending that you're an idealist or something. So I was wondering how you look at those strands of spirituality.
Idealism in general, and analytic idealism in particular, does not provide a foundation for the notion that you can have whatever you want to have just by thinking positively about it. I think that's empirically nonsensical. Otherwise, there would be no war in Ukraine right now, because I've been wishing very deeply, very sincerely that it would stop. But it doesn't. It has a life of its own, regardless of what my personal mentation does. So I think we can very clearly, unambiguously, and immediately put that down to, naive, wishful thinking. But as most silly things that humans come up with, it has a root of truth. If you can sincerely be positive in your inner mentation, you probably live longer. Your health will be better. And we know that scientifically. A positive outlook on life extends life by several years. That doesn't mean that the universe is some kind of restaurant where you can order things from the menu. I have two things to say about that. One is, it's obviously false. I don't think it needs any further elaboration. And the second is, it's a reification of the ego. The wishes of the ego are supposed to be fulfilled by the universe, as if the ego were God. I think that's unhelpful, dysfunctional, contradictory with the original intuition, which is that all is mental and that a positive attitude is healthy for your own dissociated alter. Those are true. But when taken to the limit of that book, The Secret, it becomes dysfunctional and naive. We know that an attempt to project divinity onto the ego can have disastrous effects. And we know that for a long time, because it had disastrous effects for Nietzsche. Mm-hmm. Because Nietzsche was a profoundly religious person by nature, by character. And because of his rational thinking, denying the literal interpretation of the divinity to himself, he had to find a replacement, and that replacement was the Übermensch, the Superman, the Overman, whatever you want to call it, was a sort of a egoic incarnation of divinity without the divinity, but having the power of the divinity, and that literally made him mad, made him crazy, and ended his productive life. And notions like The Secret, I think, are tremendously dysfunctional, because it will bring guilt, because the vast majority of people who will attempt to control the world through positive thinking will fail. A loved one will die, they will get a diagnosis, they will be fired or fail to get the house they want, and then they will blame themselves because they think it's all about them. And that's the disaster. That's the prison. There is such an expansive vista to be had if you understand that your life is not about you, has never been and will never be. If you really grok this, if you internalize this, the world will become so much bigger, expanded. It will have a new dimension of depth and meaning that you've never discerned before. It will be like opening the windows on a dark, steamy room with vicious air inside. You go like, oh, now I'm living for the first time. And that's the paradox. It's that freedom of service, that freedom of the sacrifice. That's the paradox. And if people experience that, they will look back at Rhonda Byrne, or whatever she's called, and all that stuff in The Secret. They will look back at that and say, oh, children, they started from a true intuition and they made a mess of it, like we normally do.
Absolutely. Well, that brings us back to materialism, because one of the things that you sometimes also say, and I also agree with, is that there's one thing that there's this philosophical materialism, which sees the world in terms of existing out of pure matter. But of course, with materialism comes a whole social worldview as well, where consuming matter logically becomes the thing that you have to do, because if all in the world is matter, that's the only thing you can do. Aggregate materials, aggregate more stuff, basically. So I know you see it from the same point of view, that that's a huge problem that materialism has created. But I think my question is now a bit, I have the feeling that the materialist or the great dominance of the scientist / materialist worldview is kind of crumbling down bit by bit. I only have this feeling for the last 10 years or so.
Yes.
But I'm a bit wary because every age has his idea that the new ages are around the corner or something. So I just wanted to ask you, do you also have the feeling that you are getting more traction with your ideas, that other spiritual religious ideas about idealism are gaining more traction, sometimes not in the best ways, like we just discussed with positive thinking, but that at least this materialist worldview is crumbling down a bit? And so what are but that's the next question. Let's first stick to that one. Do you think that is really happening or not?
Oh, absolutely. It's very palpably and empirically real what's happening. Usually the big change, when we think for the first time it's happening now, it's not. Mm. It's a sort of it misfires. And so you could say that the first big change happened in the late 60s. When a larger segment of society started embracing new thought and a life of understanding as opposed to a life of power and the accumulation of material objects like the next pair of shoes or that car or that yacht. But that misfired. Usually optimism builds up too soon for the real transition. It happens with technology as well. You know, the first bubble of e-commerce in the 90s, it burst in the early 2000s, just to pick up steam again and then really happen. And now we order groceries from the computer. I don't buy anything that is not bought from the computer, everything. So it happens. And when it happens, it tends to be less spectacular, more gradual. It's not as a marked moment, turning point in history. When you look back, you realize, oh, it has happened already. You know, that's how you realize it. And that's what's happening now. It is changing. It went through that misfiring of the late 60s, and now it's actually happening. And I can tell you empirical facts that suggest this to me from the perspective of my little personal microcosm. I have always wanted to debate a materialist who was willing to come on the stage and defend materialism. It hasn't been possible for the past 10 years. It just doesn't happen. And once last year and once this year, I thought it finally would happen because two different institutions, one was the Psychedelic Society in the UK and the other one the Institute of Art and Ideas, they managed to organize a debate, public open debate between me and a well-known materialist. So the latest one was with Patricia Churchland, a very famous philosopher who is an eliminativist, the most radical form of materialism that even denies the very existence of certain experiences. It says these experiences don't really exist. So it's not only that they are secondary processes of caused by physical stuff. No, they don't even exist.
That's what I call radical or fundamentalist materialism, even.
Yeah. And the IAI invited her because they wanted a debate between different polarities. And they thought she's the ultimate materialist alive. She's 75 now, a lifetime of defending materialism. And Bernardo is the most, vocal defender of idealism. And we started the debate. And after the initial pleasantries and stuff, when it began to get down to it, the first thing Patricia said was, well, I'm not a materialist. I'm an agnostic.
Look at that.
A lifetime eliminativist starts a debate against an idealist by saying, I'm not a materialist. I'm an agnostic. The same thing happened last year with a very famous English biologist, not Richard Dawkins, but a guy very famous in the UK at least. It's well known that in a debate against a rabbi, he used the F word against the rabbi. He said, F you, against the rabbi live on television. I forgot his name. I actually like him, despite this character trait of his. I actually like him. I forgot his name, but he was debating me. And the same thing late last year, he started the debate by saying, I could actually be open to Bernardo's ideas. And I just deflated completely because I come prepared for a good fight. And It is impossible to have a good fight now. All you can get is people willing to criticize idealism, but you no longer get anyone willing to come in a public forum and defend materialism.
That's interesting.
It is impossible now. And the fact that my message is carried by mainstream, I published over almost a dozen articles from my own pen on Scientific American, not to mention the other stuff that they wrote about my work. But more than 10 publications on Scientific American, the ultimate mainstream popular scientific publication, a magazine that exists now for over 175 years, the longest in continuous publication in the world across all fields of media. This wouldn't have happened 15 years ago. I published papers in top academic journals. This wouldn't have happened 20 years ago. I get invited to speak in events that are completely mainstream. And I was not so long ago in a primetime Dutch television documentary of the VPRO. It's changing. It's happening. And it's not only me, my own ideas. It's a whole different attitude. And as the millennials and after them, the Zoomers become, the generation that has their hands in the control levers of the world, this transition will be complete.
Yeah. But it's not because it's a transition that it's also necessarily gonna go in a good direction. Because if you look at materialism, there was a reason, of course, why certain scientific ideas got traction. Also, there were social political reasons for it, which were very, very positive and advanced humanity in certain ways. There's no denying the whole history of the Enlightenment period and so on. One can be critical about it, but lots of good ideas emerged from it as well. But then materialism kind of grew into this, like I said, social materialism as well, where consuming matter is the only thing you could do. But then if idealism breaks through, I'm a bit wondering, because I love the things that you said about service and how service and sacrifice is the one thing that balances everything. Yes, you can realize, if you think through an idealist perspective, then you are God, just like Christ was God as a full person. That could lead to either the egotistical idea of being God, or you could bring in the concept of sacrifice and being focused on the thing that is bigger than you, and so not falling into the trap of collapsing the divine within yourself. I get that on a personal level, but what do we do on a societal level? Because I think if idealism breaks through more and more, it could, for example, just to give an example and to make it concrete, it could form the basis for things like the metaverse of Mark Zuckerberg just as well, where, reality is nothing but mind. Let's create this world wherein you're nothing but mind, and that's a good place to be. If you ask me, it's more like hell if you look at the concept of the metaverse. But I can see how idealism could become used or abused to support this kind of Zuckerbergian world.
Yes, so let me disclaim all this nonsense absolutely unambiguously. The error here is to think that God is your ego. That's not what is being said. What is being said is that the transpersonal in you is the same as the transpersonal in nature, and that is God, not your ego. Otherwise, you get ego inflation. And that's an error. And that's not what I ever meant to suggest, imply, say, state. No, I disclaim that completely. Your ego doesn't even really exist. To say that it's God, it's piling nonsense on top of nonsense and an error on top of mistake. That's not the point. The freedom of service is the freedom in which you understand that your ego is just a tool. And what you are is the transpersonal expressing itself through you. That's what you really are. The ego is just a narrative. It's a false account. It's a story running in our minds about what we are supposed to be. It's not what is really expressing itself or trying to express itself through you, because that's transpersonal. And the hallmark of the transpersonal is that it doesn't give a damn about your personal safety or your personal success. It doesn't care whether you get the credit. It doesn't care whether tomorrow you have a roof above your head. It doesn't care whether you get the girlfriend that you want. It couldn't care less. Its goals are so impersonal as to be dangerous to your personal survival. And that's why the ego has to have a dialogue with the transpersonal in you, because if you stop existing, you can't serve either. And nobody is helped, not God and not you, by your death. The mistake people then make is to misunderstand idealism and non-duality and all these philosophies as a reification of the ego. That's not freedom. That's claustrophobia to the power of 1,000. It's the ultimate lack of freedom, because you'll be constantly trying to serve an entity that doesn't exist. And you will never find meaning in that. It's like a dog chasing its own tail. It's never going anywhere. It's spending enormous amounts of energy to not go anywhere. That's not freedom. Freedom is in realizing that your ego is just a tool. Something in you needs to know to which mouth to bring the fork. Otherwise, you're going to die and you cease to exist as a tool. So we need the ego. But a reification of the ego, like Nietzsche tried to do, it leads to unhappiness, to depression, to nihilism, to the unbearable lightness of being, because the ego doesn't exist. So it's light. It floats in the wind. And possibly to suicide. And if not, it leads to ego inflation and turns into a Hitler or a Putin, somebody who becomes inflated with the dark side of the divinity. None of this is functional. None of this is helpful. Mm-hmm. Look, if you understand the freedom of service, satisfying our addictive urges, we live an addictive style of life. And I mean by this more than just substance addiction. I mean by this addiction to porn, addiction to distraction, addiction to power, to influence, addiction to acknowledgement, addiction to sugar, to television, meat, big addiction. So we live a completely addictive lifestyle that dovetails very nicely with capitalism, because it turns us into sort of deranged consumers. If you understand the freedom of the freedom of service to the transpersonal, all of those patterns of addiction just fall away, and things that you think are important to you, like that you have fun, that you're in control, that you're happy, it dissolves into thin air. And that's why I call it freedom, because it liberates you from yourself and your own little narratives, your own little musts and must nots. You're liberated from all that crap.
But again, that's why I say I get all of that in a personal sense, in a personal spiritual sense. But what do we do on a societal level? Can we make sure that all those things are realized socially as well? Because more and more the world is addicting us to the internet, and in a certain sense the internet is a mental thing, and people are being chained to their 8 hours a day when they're working behind Excel files which are uploaded to the cloud, and then they come home and they're checking Facebook and so on, where they exist again in a mental state of an avatar they've created online instead of being themselves, which kind of brings us back to the relevance of being matter as well, in a certain sense. Yes, it might be a split of the universal mind, but for me, the real split I am is better than the avatarian counterpart on the internet.
Yeah, the meta-avatars are just embodiments of the ego, because the ego has a picture of itself, and it wants to shape itself according to its own picture, and we give it the power to do that in the virtual worlds of the internet and technology. I don't think any of that. I mean, it can be used as just fun, but if it becomes, the meaning of your life, I think you're down a very dysfunctional path. Look, I don't think, Jonas, that preaching will solve anything, because otherwise 2,000 years of Christianity would have solved something. True. Because for 2,000 years we have been preaching that life is a service to God, which it is, but all the preaching led nowhere. It only, we only see a reification of the ego more and more. So I don't think preaching helps. I think this has to be whatever change will happen, it has to be a spontaneous grassroots process that arises first and spontaneously within the individual, because the collective is just a collection of individuals. There is nothing except the individuals. Everything else supervenes on individuals. There is no such a thing as Mother Russia. That's just a geopolitical abstraction. What there is the individual lives of the Russians. And if you lose sight of that, you wage war on Ukraine and bring great suffering to the world. So it has to arise spontaneously from within. All we can do is to offer signs on the road that when that thing emerges naturally in an individual, when that individual looks around for answers to the newly emerging questions, they see beacons of light here and there. But they will bring themselves to those beacons of light. They can't be brought to the beacons of light. They can't be preached into it, forced into it, talked into it. All we can do is to raise the beacons and wait for people to, raise their heads, look around, see the beacon and want to go. That's all we can do. Beyond that, it's not up to us. And that's part of the reason of the freedom of service. At least to me, you understand that you have ultimate responsibility for your part in the play, but you do not have responsibility for the end result. You as an individual, as a little ego, you are not God. The subjectivity in you is God. It's what you have ever always been and will ever be. But that personal self is a tool. It doesn't have standalone existence. So it cannot be responsible for the end goal. That realization is also tremendously liberating, because my life is now and has been for a while a life purely of service. So I take responsibility for what I must do. That's why I'm here talking to you. But I do not take responsibility for the end result. So if we do not make that transition collectively as a society in my lifetime, it's not my problem, because I am not God. I, as the ego, I, as Bernardo Kastrup, am not God. This is God's job. Mine is to do my part. You see what I mean? And it so happens, and that's the paradox with the secret nonsense. The paradox is the following. If you truly act in service, not for the happiness of your own ego, but if you understand that the meaning of your life is not to you, somehow, and don't ask me how, doors begin to open all over the place. So a way is sort of laid free in front of you, and an invitation like, okay, come this way, come this way. Things are facilitated, not because you thought positively about that. No, that stuff doesn't even bring you in a direction that will fulfill you personally. Well, it does fulfill you impersonally, but it's not about your happiness, what you have. It's not about your car, even your physical health. It's about something else. Those are other goals. And the road sort of opens magically towards those other goals. So my hope is that God, or the transpersonal in all of us, will spontaneously lead to this transition within individuals. And if the ones of us who have been deputized to sort of light up the beacons, if we do our jobs, when that collective process begins to happen through individuals, they will have where to go. They will see the beacons and they will go there. Whether that happens, however, is not my problem. And if it does begin to happen, my hope is that these individuals who will go after the beacon, they will experience a road opening before them. Things just begin to fall in place if you're serving the transpersonal. Because you are just not fighting what nature is trying to do through you. The moment you stop fighting nature, what it's trying to do through you, things flow. Because the whole of nature is trying to go in that direction where you now allow yourself to go. And if people start realizing this, they start feeling this, that the road is facilitated, it will happen. But again, it's not my problem. I light up the beacons and then I'm fine.
Can do. Well, on that note, Bernardo, this was a hugely interesting conversation. So thanks for coming on, Revisioning Religion, and hopefully see you next time.
My pleasure to be here. Thanks for the opportunity, Jonas.